Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you've made a visit to Pocahontas County sound pretty attractive. Sounds like that's something we all ought to make an excursion out there. I want to thank you for holding this hearing to consider the nominations of Michael O'Reilly to be Commissioner at the Federal Communication Commission and the nomination of Terrell McSweeny to be Commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission. Mr. O'Reilly and Ms. McSweeny, thank you very much for your willingness to serve the nation in these important positions of responsibility. I've had the privilege of being one of 5 members for whom Mr. O'Reilly has worked for in the Senate: John Sununu, John Ensign, myself, John Kyle, and most recently John Cornyn. I think you detect a pattern there. He's been around a lot of Johns. But Mike did excellent work at the Policy Committee. Mike did excellent work at the Policy Committee, and he's been a dedicated public service in Congress for nearly 20 years. Much of Mike's Senate work focused on the nation's communications landscape, and I'm sure he will continue to serve our country with distinction in his new role at the FCC should he be confirmed. As I've said before, it's clear we're living in the middle of a digital revolution which is being powered in large part by the huge investments made by the broadband industry. There's enormous potential for job creation and innovation in the broadband, Internet, and technology sectors. Both the FCC and the FTC are regulatory agencies that oversee various aspects of the interactions between consumers and industry in these important sectors of our economy, whether it is mobile technology privacy issues, which the FTC is actively investigating, or the FCC's critical efforts to increase the availability of private sector spectrum to keep pace with exploding demand. Those who are a part of these independent agencies must make a sound judgment so they can find the right balance between intervening in the marketplace to correct market failures and applying restraint from taking actions that could overburden industry, harm innovation, and stifle economic growth. I believe we, as a committee, must focus on establishing modern legal and regulatory structures that serve the purposes of our 21st century economy, whether it's reviewing the authorities of the FTC under Section 5 of its statute regarding unfair methods of competition and unfair and deceptive acts or practices, or seeking to modernize and streamline our telecom laws to better reflect today's converging marketplace. It's time for our technology and communication sectors to be governed by laws written in the 21st century that reflect today's reality and allow for tomorrow's advances rather than laws established long before the Internet was invented. I hope that the nominees before us today will work with us in Congress, should they be confirmed, to seek to amend the law where it may be inadequate or outdated. In addition to these efforts, we must also be mindful of the rural areas of our nation. Universal service is, of course, very important to rural America. The Universal Service Fund reforms put in place by the FCC in the fall of 2011 are unfortunately creating a great deal of uncertainty and unpredictability for many rural carriers. As the FCC continues implementing these reforms, I hope that a full slate of FCC commissioners will look to apply them in a way that is more predictable for rural carriers and customers. Rural Americans are also facing significant call completion problems. I'm troubled by one study indicating that during a period between 2011 and 2012, the incompletion rate was 13 times higher in rural areas than in non-rural areas. Calls that fail to be completed result in rural businesses losing customers and family members in rural areas being cut off from each other. I was pleased to see the FCC take action yesterday by issuing an order and notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks to enhance the agency's ability to investigate this problem by taking steps to improve the performance of calls made to rural America. Sadly, for impacted customers and businesses in rural areas, including South Dakota, this has taken far too long to remedy. I would be remiss if I did not extend an open invitation to both of you to visit South Dakota. There's no substitute for seeing firsthand the challenges that are unique to rural communities and the value that new technology holds for Americans living in rural areas. I want to make sure that all consumers, including those in rural communities, are able to enjoy the economic and societal benefits of the digital economy. With regard to the nominations process for Mr. O'Reilly, I'm mindful that the President's nominee for Chairman of the FCC is awaiting floor action, and I hope, Mr. Chairman, that we can quickly process Mr. O'Reilly's nomination and that we can ultimately have a full slate of FCC commissioners by the time Congress breaks for the recess currently scheduled for mid-October. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for holding this important hearing, and I look forward to hearing the testimony from our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McSweeny, you were a co-author of the Justice Department's ex parte submission filed in the FCC's mobile spectrum holdings proceeding. And as you may know, I've been somewhat critical of that filing. Like many of my Republican colleagues, I believe the FCC should allow all qualified and interested parties to participate freely in spectrum auctions rather than micromanaging auctions rules in an effort to predetermine individual winners and losers. And I'm wondering if, while preparing the ex parte submission, did you and other DOJ staff review previous FCC spectrum auctions to analyze what effects the participation of certain carriers has had on the participation of others? And then a second question, did the DOJ find any positive correlation between auction participation and greater bidding restrictions in past spectrum auctions?
Senator, thanks for the question. We at the division do from time to time comment on issues related to competition and competition policy and other agency rulemakings. And the FCC Mobile Spectrum Holdings comment that the Antitrust Division filed was a part of that competition advocacy. As an expert agency in competition and markets, the comment's focus is mainly on flagging the potential impact and on competitive dynamics of spectrum holdings. We do believe that spectrum is a key input in the wireless space, and the comment that the division wrote, which I was involved in drafting along with the experts in our telecommunications section and our economic section and others at the department, was focused on flagging that competition concern and suggesting the FCC think about it in designing its mobile spectrum holdings rule. In that context, we didn't take a careful review of how to design the auction. I think the Department of Justice Antitrust Division doesn't hold itself out to be an expert in auction design, merely an expert in competition. And so the thrust of the comment is really to focus on the impact on competition and consumers, and so that's primarily what we were articulating there.
So you didn't look at the correlation in past auctions, spectrum auctions, between participation and bidding restrictions?
I did not personally know.
Okay. Mr. O'Reilly, you've observed FCC spectrum auctions for nearly 2 decades. I think we all tend to agree that most successful auctions are those that maximize bidders, maximize revenue, and most importantly, maximize deployment of the spectrum. These goals maintain a competitive market, provide American taxpayers a return for the use of a public resource, and deliver modern communications to all Americans, including those in rural areas such as my home state of South Dakota. Given your experience and based on what has actually happened in previous auctions, can you identify any traits that make an auction successful, and have you observed traits that reduce bidders' revenue or deployment?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Let me address the second part, and that is that in my experience, and I followed these spectrum auctions exceptionally close for, as you highlighted, 20 years, when the Commission has tried to micromanage or manipulate the spectrum auctions, it's often been problematic. Secondly, when they have done such actions, it has led to a situation down the road where the person who has obtained the license at either a discount or at the benefit of someone else being excluded winds up flipping the license to another participant. Therefore, the taxpayer, the ratepayer, the benefit has been lost to the Federal Government. So I'm cautious as we enter the space to want to impose any kind of obligations on bidding eligibility. Okay.
I'm going to shift gears for just a minute, but again, a question for you, Mr. O'Reilly. Congress has required that passenger railroads and freight railroads carrying certain hazardous materials install positive train control technology by December 31st of the year 2015. And in their efforts to meet this deadline, railroads have discovered that they're going to need to construct thousands of new communications towers in order to install positive train control. Since each of these towers has to be approved by the FCC, this could be a very lengthy process unless the FCC is able to streamline that effort. In fact, the FCC is reportedly so overwhelmed by the coming influx of PTC-related applications that it's advised railroads not to proceed with any applications until the Commission can come up with an expedited protocol for processing these applications. And as the Government Accountability Office reported in August, the impact of halting construction on the towers may result in additional delays in railroads' timeframes for implementation of PTC. Let me first just ask the general question, are you aware of this issue?
So, thank you, Senator. I would suggest I'm not an expert in trains, but I am aware of this issue and how it interacts with the responsibilities of the Federal Communications Commission and the need for additional tower siting.
And if confirmed, would you commit to working with Congress, with the FRA, and with passenger and freight rail industry to help implement PTC, which faces a number of technical challenges that are no doubt going to require an extension of the looming deadline that most, if not all, railroads are going to be unable to meet?
Yes, sir. I would want to work with all stakeholders, and especially this committee, on working through the issues on tower siting for the PTC going forward.
Okay. I would just be curious, and this is more of a general question, but as you know, the so-called IP transition issue is going to be one of the top challenges facing the FCC over the coming years. And I'm wondering, if confirmed, how you would approach this important issue and what impact you think the IP transition will have on rural areas like South Dakota. In addition, what benefits do you see the IP transition providing to communications providers and consumers in rural areas?
Thank you. So I have difficulty when people use the word transition for IP. As I highlighted in my testimony, I think the Internet is a very disruptive technology, and that's to the benefit of consumers. So it's difficult to manage and control. However, the Commission has explored the opportunity of running or testing a number of trials in this space, and I'd be supportive of looking at what public policy issues may come from such trials, and I'd be open to that. I do believe that IP transition has an opportunity to have benefits in all corners of our nation, especially in rural America, where it can lower the cost for operating, especially in very far-reaching rural districts.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator Thune.